The nitrogen era of Thomas is easily the most boring era of the show. Practically every episode follows the 3 strikes formula. X character is given a job but has some other goal in mind. They make one mistake, then another, and only on the third and usually final mistake do they stop and realize what they've done. Then in a montage we see them fix their mistake and learn a lesson or achieve their own goal. Despite each episode being written the same way, I did find a few that stand out from the rest, either for good or not so good. So for this video, I will be counting down my top 10 best and worst episodes of Nitrogen Thomas. I will swap between good and bad every other episode. I will also give a brief rundown of the plot and then go over why I put it on the list. Without any further ado, let's start off with the 10th worst episode.
Thomas and the Snowman Party.
The episode starts by showing us that children are building a snowman. Percy and James tell Thomas that for a snowman party, Farmer McColl, the brass band, and Mr. Bubbles will be there. The Fat Controller then tells Thomas that he needs to collect a box from Natford, and the children complain that they don't have a hat for their snowman. So instead of collecting the Fat Controller's package, Thomas spends the entire episode stealing hats he finds along the way. When he returns to the station, he finds out the hats belong to people who are coming to the party. So he goes and does his job like he was told to, and gives everyone their hats back. And wouldn't you know it, the Fat Controller's special package is a new hat, and he gives his old one to the children. First off, Thomas has never scolded for taking the hats, thus sending the message to kids it's okay to steal. And on top of that, his crew are fully on board with taking the hats. And if the kids want to give the snowman a hat so bad, just use your own! You already gave up a scarf, why not a hat? The one thing I did like about this episode was the scene where the passenger holds down his hat when he hears Thomas.
I've found the biggest, brightest hat! The children will be pleased with that!
Here come the Rubberdubbers, splish, splash, splish, splosh.
The episode starts with Thomas and Rosie leaving the yards and running through mud puddles. The Fat Controller arrives to tell Thomas to get cleaned up so he can pull Alicia Body to a concert. Instead of going to the washdown, he splashes Charlie, Emily, and James in the muddy water and ruins their deliveries. Then he does the same to the Fat Controller and Alicia Body while putting out his own fire with the mud. When Rosie comes along, she gives Thomas some of her coal, and Thomas gives up his special by helping James and Emily instead. It ends with Thomas declining to play the game with Rosie anymore. Now the majority of this episode is dumb, but there were several things I liked about it. For one, I love how when they get splashed, the Fat Controller's first thought is to put his own hat over Alicia Body, and scolds Thomas for only getting her wet and ruining her cakes. And this is the man everyone thinks is an evil dictator, as if.
He considers he's a gentleman of merit, with a railway exquisitely fine.
I really like how the sibling-like relationship between Thomas and Rosie grows here. This is the first time we see them having fun together, following their interactions in the Hit era and Rosie's first episode. My favorite part is at the end when Thomas asks her to take Annie and Clarabelle for the special. Thomas asked someone else to take Annie and Clarabelle. This is a huge point. We all know how protective he is of his coaches. The only time he's done this before was in Percy's Promise, but even then, he was still a little uneasy when Percy took them the first time.
Thomas was anxious about Annie and Clarabelle, but both Driver and God promised to take care of them.
This really shows how much the trust has grown between these two, and I love it. But as the majority of the episode is dumb and boring, it only makes it into 10th place.
Ho Ho Snowman.
We open with Thomas and Charlie shunting cars on the main line, before Henry comes along with a short line of trucks. He says he doesn't like snow, and he's trying to be careful, so Charlie insists on telling him a joke. But when he doesn't want to hear it, Charlie decides to pretend to be a snowman and tells him the jokes to scare the living daylights out of him. After the third joke, Henry runs back and hides into the sheds, and Charlie decides to stop being intrusive and help Henry with his job. In the end, Henry listens to one of his jokes. First, all of Charlie's jokes are crap. Second, why are they shunting on the main line? There's no sidings or even switches. And of course no one likes Wimpy Henry, so that's another bad thing. Finally, Charlie is so intrusive here. Henry clearly said he doesn't want to hear the jokes, but he keeps pushing him and making Henry more uncomfortable. What he's doing here is like turning off the lights in a room for someone who's scared of the dark. It only makes things worse. When people want to be left alone, it doesn't mean double down on your efforts and do the opposite. Overall, this is just a really bad episode.
Snow Tracks.
Gordon is bragging how the snow doesn't bother him, and the Fat Controller gives him and Thomas each a job. Ignoring Emily's advice, Gordon goes on the route with Hills. On the first one, he sprays Spencer with snow, on the second he crashes into trucks, and on the third he rolls up a giant snowball that crashes into Thomas. Gordon apologizes to him and tries to help him out. When he can't, he goes to get Rocky and helps Thomas finish his job before they return to Tim's sheds. Here's a bit of trivia. This episode was actually redubbed by Mark Morgahan, who narrated the Brenner era, for a Christmas DVD.
It had snowed all night. The trees were white. The cottages were white. And even Sir Topham Hatt's railway was white.
It had snowed all night. The trees were white. The cottages were white. And even Sir Topham Hatt's railway was white.
Next, I like the animation for the snow at this shot, although the shots focused on Gordon's face are angled quite badly, though I do find this bit here funny.
Bubbling boilers! I can't see!
I really like to see Thomas and Gordon's alliance is still here, and that Gordon immediately went to get Rocky when he saw he wasn't strong enough to help Thomas, especially considering how he looked down on him in Edward Strikes Out. I also like that they made Spencer be the one who Gordon sprays with snow, considering their dynamic. Overall, this is a nice one, and it's fun seeing Thomas and Gordon just being bros.
Up, up, and away.
The episode starts by telling us what good friends Thomas and Percy are, and that Mr. Bubbles is coming to do a show. The two are given the job of transporting a giant balloon to the show, and Thomas says they should go through the forest. But Percy wants to take other routes, and Thomas doesn't want to hurt his feelings. And each time something goes wrong, Gordon comes along and gives him a reality check. And only after the third mishap do they do it Thomas's way and arrive at the show. The episode ends with the first balloon flying back. Okay, I think we all know why this episode is so bad. First, why are you using two engines to deliver a huge balloon? We can clearly see that when it's deflated, you can hold it in your hands. Just pick up Mr. Bubbles and he can blow over the show. Delivering it this way goes against railway regulations. It's clearly too big to go through tunnels and under bridges.
You can't do it.
Thank you, Audrey.
You can't upset me, Thomas. You're my best friend.
Care to explain this then?
He was very upset. Why didn't you tell me, Thomas? I tell you everything.
Hold on to your hats, folks. We're in for a rough ride with these other bad ones.
Edward the hero.
The episode starts with Harold saving a lost sheep, and Edward says he'd like to be a hero. The Fat Controller assigns him as a rescue engine for the day, though he's unsure how to act like a hero. Along the way, Edward cheers up Charlie, brings Dowager Hat her bag she misplaced, and brought Farmer McColl his sheepdog. All the while, Edward feels down for not acting like a hero, only for him to be congratulated for being just that. This is probably one of Edward's best episodes outside the classic series, because instead of making him weak and pathetic, his flaw for the episode is that he doesn't think he's being a hero by being himself. Yet, just by being the kind engine we all know him to be, Edward shows he can be a hero. I like that Edward's the one chosen to be the rescue engine for this episode, as he was often seen with a breakdown train before. I also appreciate the subtle setup and payoff, as Harold rescues a sheep at the beginning, and we see Katie the sheepdog still looking for it later. Finally, the theme they use for Edward is set to pop. Summing up, this is not only a good episode for the Nitrogen era, but good for one of Edward's episodes in general. Check this one out.
Tree trouble.
We open as Dowager Hat is telling the Diesel she would come to see their Christmas tree at the Diesel Works. Thomas overhears and says the steam engine should have the best one, and it becomes a competition for who can get the best tree.
Oh, a duel! How very delightful!
They look for trees until they decide on two from Misty Island, but as they leave, they fall off the flatbeds and get crushed. Finally, Thomas lights up and gets the Diesels a Christmas tree. The reason I don't like this episode is because Thomas is such a jerk for no reason. He hears the Diesels are going to have a tree, now he wants a better one. And whenever they find some, he always puts them down. What did the Diesels do to deserve this? They did nothing wrong in this episode, and Thomas is just a prick to them. He's just too stuck up and selfish to let them have something nice for once. They never let the Diesels versus Steamies fight end, do they? Nothing else to say, I just really don't like this one.
Spencer the Grand.
Soda is covered in a thick fog, and all the engines are supposed to stay in the shed. But Spencer thinks he's too good for staying in the sheds, and tries to find his way to the Duke and Duchess's summer house instead, but ends up going to the quarry and the dump before looping back to Tidmouth. When he finds out Percy is still not returned, he decides to go out and find him, and bring him back home to his friends. In the end, he does stay with them. This is Spencer's first solo episode, and I think they handled it quite well. Now that he's gone up against Gordon, Edward, and Thomas, he now starts to learn humility, fitting in well to his own arc. He first thought he was the finest engine on Sodor, and was beat by Gordon. He thought he was the fastest, but he was beat by Edward, an engine far past his prime. He thought tender engines were best, but was beat by Thomas. But this episode does something different, and shows Spencer being humbled for the first time. We saw a hint of this in Hero of the Rails when he apologized to Hero and Thomas, but he seemed much meeker in this scene.
You can ease your axles here, Spencer, if you'd like to.
I don't deserve your kindness, Thomas.
Now he's ready to start learning from his mistakes and making friends. He goes out to find Percy because his friends are worried about him, and he uses Thomas and Percy's whistles to help him along the way, something he never would have done before. You can also see how he goes from boastful to reassuring himself to defeat each time he makes a mistake. Although I do think the animators made it a little too foggy. I mean, we can hardly see Spencer, let alone the other characters. But overall, I like this one. It's a good episode for them to start putting Spencer on the right track.
Hey, I got a million more just like it.
Wonky Whistle.
A country show is being held on Sodor, and Thomas is impatient to get his whistle fixed. Despite Victor telling him to wait, he leaves while his whistle is still broken. As he goes about telling people about the show, he keeps letting the animals he was meant to deliver out of his van. When he gets there, he scares the sheep out of their pen, and only then does he realize his whistle is broken and goes to get it fixed. Then somehow by putting animal feed in the vans, the animals magically come back and Thomas whistles out of the fair. Okay, so clearly Thomas is deaf and blind in this episode. I mean, the cow walks right past him, and he didn't see it? Also, when he left the steamworks, he nearly killed the workmen on his tanks. This one is so infuriating because from the time Thomas starts moving, the audience and everyone around him knows that Thomas needs to stop and get his whistle fixed, but he's so stupid that he doesn't until he loses all the animals. This one is just one of those episodes that makes you want to turn it off more than anything. Do yourself a favor and don't bother watching this one.
Diesel's special delivery.
We open with Diesel delivering Slate to the school, and he meets James at Maithwaite Station. James is clapped and cheered for delivering pigs, and Diesel remarks that he never gets clapped and cheered.
That's because you are a Diesel.
That's crazy!
This causes him to try to find a way for the children to cheer him. He asks Thomas and Rosie if he can take their specials, and eventually takes James's piglets to the children. But when he does, he discovers that the children don't want to see these specials anymore, and only want their school roof fixed. So he goes to retrieve the slate and brings it to the school, where he is clapped and cheered for the first time. There's a lot I like about this episode. Firstly, this is Diesel's second lead role, following the world's strongest engine. We also see him in a place of sympathy, something I believe started in Emily and the Special Coaches. His motivation is also very well thought out, as Diesel are almost always seen as the bad guy, and doesn't get praise for his work, although usually that's due to his own incompetence. I think this episode is also the best portrayal of the Steamy versus Diesel plot these episodes keep coming back to. Most of the time the Diesels are seen as the bad guys, and the Steamies the good guys, so the audience is always supposed to root for the Steamies. But here we see things from Diesel's perspective, and that he wants the same things the Steamies have. They have special paint jobs, names, and are given attention wherever they go, while the average everyday Diesel is just ignored. And you know what? This is really accurate. When a steam engine goes on rail tours, it's a big deal and rail fans flock the platforms. But when a Diesel comes by, it's nothing special. I guess that's just the cost of being revolutionary. Diesel is just one of the hundreds, but many of the steam engines on Sodor are one of a kind, or the last of their class. To sum up, this episode shows a new angle to the series-long rivalry between Steam and Diesel, and gives us a glimpse into Diesel as a character. I really like this one, even for the Miller era, and that's really saying something.
Emily's Winter Party Special.
We start with the news that an engine who is most helpful will pull a winter party special before the wind blows the Fat Controller's hat away. Emily volunteers to find it for him, and gets her hopes up to be the winter party engine. But rather than find the hat, she goes and brags to Thomas and Henry instead. She wastes so much time in doing this that there's barely any time left before the party, so she tells Victor to decorate her. But when she's about to leave, the Fat Controller scolds her for not doing her job. And surprise surprise, Thomas gets to be the party engine instead. But at the last minute, Emily finds a hat on a snowman and brings it to the Fat Controller. Firstly, this episode has a premise that we've seen tried and failed before with Topped Off Thomas. Next, Emily wastes her whole day bragging over the work she hasn't done, and putting others down.
I might be chosen to pull the present train!
Sorry, Henry, but I will probably be given that job.
Oh!
Mission failed! We'll get them next time.
She then tries to take a reward without earning it, and when she finds a random hat on a snowman, she decides it must be the Fat Controller's hat. This episode was bad enough, but just you wait, we're not done with Emily just yet.
Happy birthday, sir.
The Fat Controller asks Thomas to work with Winston while he goes shopping with his family on his birthday. Salty tells a story about when he was younger, so Thomas used to ride with Edward on his birthday in a special wagon. As Thomas would go about his work, Winston keeps wandering off somewhere else. Eventually, Thomas tells him to go in front to keep a better eye on him. When Thomas accidentally rams into the back of him, Winston explains why he dawdled, as he was looking for the old carriage they were told about. When they find it, they take it to be restored, and Edward brings it to Natford to surprise the Fat Controller. From what I can tell, many fans of the show actually like this one, and I'm in agreement. Firstly, it has good world building, complete with an old-time flashback to Soldor's early years. I also like the use of Edward and Salty as the ones who tell the story, possibly building off Salty's surprise from the second season. This is also the first time in a while we see Thomas focus on his work instead of being dumb like he has for the past seasons.
I was trying to look for something.
Looking for things is not being really useful.
And finally, we have this scene, which has become rather well known in the fandom.
Oh my! I remember this. Every year, on my birthday.
Had this been the last episode for the season instead of Christmas Tree Express, it would have made for a great finale for the season and era. I really like this one, and I'm glad it gets a pass from most fans despite its era.
Flash, bang, wallop.
The Fat Controller comes to Tim the Sheds and tells the engines that a photographer will come to Sodor to take pictures of the engines for a book. Gordon brags that he'll be in the most pictures, but Thomas wants to be in more. So he tries to get in the pictures of his friends, causing Percy and James to crash in surprise. When he tries to be in Henry's picture, the smoke causes the photographer to lose his camera and break it. So he goes to Brenham to get the backup camera and helps James and Percy back on the track. The next day, the book comes out and a picture of Thomas helping Percy is on the front cover. So first off, how does Thomas not realize his friends are crashed after he passes them? It's clearly audible, and he goes back to apologize later. So not only does he try to take their place in the pictures, but he also makes it so that they can't be in anymore. Like what about poor James? He won't be in any pictures now. And why didn't they have Henry go get the spare camera, since Thomas went to help with the crashes he caused? He's clearly not doing anything, he's just sitting here. And Thomas's actions are rewarded with him being on the front cover? Imagine if this was a yearbook, and by stealing attention in everyone else's pictures, you get to be on the front cover. This is not something we should be encouraging kids to do. Also, using an image of the aftermath of a crash for a front cover is very bad publicity. This is the complete opposite of a useful railway promotion. The one good thing about this episode was the pictures of the real engine from the book in the beginning. Another bad one, and I really don't like it.
Bust my buffers.
After our opening dialogue about diesels and steamies, Gordon is seen putting down the diesels at the docks.
I am Gordon. I am blue. You are yellow and stripy. Yellow and stripy is not grand.
After biffing into Diesel's flatbed, he is told to bring parts to the diesel works. After another crash, his buffers come off and Dan and Dart offer to fix them. Gordon tries to refuse, but Mavis and Salty have him go back to get the substitute buffer beam. And when he returns to the docks, Airy, Bert, and Diesel get a laughing at him.
Honking horns, Gordon.
Honking horns!
Thomas meanwhile is impressed and reminds Gordon that his buffers allow him to still get his work done. After that, Gordon carries on with his work until he gets his old buffers fixed. My favorite thing about this episode is that it feels especially written for Gordon. What I mean is, most episodes of this era don't depend on a lead character or their personality. They write the script and choose an engine at random to lead, almost always being Thomas. But this one can only work with Gordon as a lead. His pompous behavior as a top Link Express engine make him see himself above the common little diesel shunters. And while he is painted for high-class passengers, Airy and Bert have yellow and black stripes and look industrial. Yet the only thing that allows Gordon to continue with his work is an industrial buffer beam. The lesson Gordon learns here isn't that diesels aren't bad, because he knows several good ones, and had a prior episode where Boko won him over. He learns that as long as you have what you need to get the job done, you don't need to worry about how you look. Nor should you look down on others for their appearance. I also like how all the side characters are used. Mavis and Salty are both diesels Gordon has seen to know what they're talking about. Airy and Bert continue the roles they've consistently had since Middle Engine, although I still prefer them in Stepney Gets Lost. And Thomas is the one who helps lift Gordon's spirits instead of teasing him, as a callback to their alliance from Season 1. Despite the repetitive second act these stories are known for, I honestly think that this is one of Arrow's best episodes.
Sodor Surprise Day.
The narrator tells us there's a special day on Sodor especially for surprising everyone, but Gordon is annoyed by it. He is sent to get fireworks, while Thomas is sent to get bunting. Instead, he scares Rosie and Viv while attempting to make Gordon laugh. When he tries a third time, he scares Cranky into dropping a crate of fireworks, which go off in all directions. This has the opposite intended effect on Gordon, who dislikes the day even more. So Thomas decides to substitute the fireworks with Harold covered in lights, which somehow wins Gordon over. Firstly, how is causing multiple crashes funny? Secondly, like Ho Ho Snowman, Thomas is disregarding Gordon's wishes to not be part of the fun. Also, by having Harold fly around instead of the fireworks, this means the island doesn't have its rescue helicopter available. And finally, the mayhem Thomas causes at the docks nearly knocks Harold out of the sky, or damages Gordon and Cranky. No wonder Gordon hates Sodor Surprise Day. Thomas could have killed him! Honestly, this one's worse than Ho Ho Snowman, just for the fact that people and machines almost got hurt. Let's move on.
Jitters and Japes.
After the opening dialogue about the Fat Controller's family, Thomas is asked to take the Dowager Hat to Misty Island. Thomas asks Toby how to treat older people, and he tells him to be slow and careful. But as he tries to do so, Dowager grows more impatient and eventually tells him to stop and take her back. But as he hurries, he realizes that by rushing and rocking around, she starts to enjoy herself. So for the rest of the trip, he does just that, and she has a much better time. A really nice thing to see this episode is the Fat Controller's family, both in the opening setup and showing how Dowager Hat, despite her age, is very much an adrenaline junkie. Another thing I'd like to mention is that in my binge of the season, I quickly lost interest and had to force myself to keep going as I was bored out of my brain. The way Dowager acts here made her relatable when she lost patience. I particularly like this line here for how funny it sounds.
I'm sorry, Dowager Hat. I thought I knew what you would think was fun.
Well, you didn't.
I also like how Toby is utilized here, as Thomas turns to him for advice and he tells him how he would use the time. Very much in character for him. And despite being on Misty Island, we never see the logging locos. That's a plus. And this episode has a very good message. Not all old people want to take it slow and rest. Many want to get out there and live their lives to the fullest. I'm more than happy to say how this is one of my favorite episodes of the era.
Pingy Pongy Pickup.
In preparation for a soccer match, the Fat Controller lists off jobs that need to be done, and leaves it to Thomas to decide who does what. But because Emily's too busy bragging over how much she knows about the sport, the others decide who does what, leaving her to collect the dirty laundry. This makes her cross, so she instead tries to help the others by trying to take the trains and neglecting her own job. Only when she finds out the laundry she has to pick up was the team's uniforms does she do her job. She goes and delivers the laundry to be washed and has it air dried on the way to the game. Oh boy, where do I begin? Everything wrong with this episode is entirely due to Emily being too proud and obsessed with the soccer team. She got mad when the others divvied out the jobs, because she was too busy bragging about how much she knew. She didn't listen to Percy saying he didn't need help with his one singular truck, so she pulled it off the tracks. She nearly caused a collision with James, and had he not applied his brakes, there could have been a crash injuring the passengers. I don't think I'm stressing this hard enough. She put her own ego ahead of the safety of her passengers. And her solution to wet clothes is to strap them to her and let the wind dry them? Oh yeah, that's a great idea. Let the wind blow your cinders and ashes into the freshly cleaned laundry. I bet the team would love to use soot-covered clothes for their match. And what are kids supposed to learn from this? If you don't get what you want, don't let everyone else have it? I know some people think Emily's Adventure was her worst episode, but I'm putting down my vote for this as her worst portrayal ever.
Victor says yes.
We open with Victor working on several engines at the Steamworks when the Fat Controller arrives. He tells Victor that Gordon needs maintenance quickly. Despite not having room for him, he accepts the job on top of his current work. As the episode continues, more engines arrive and it gets more crowded, until Gordon's valves spray fumes and soot all over the Fat Controller. He scolds Victor, but gives him the chance to put things right. So Victor decides to put priority on the most important engines while the others have to wait. Now, unlike the episodes we've seen on this list, I don't have a lot of points to make on this episode. Instead, I put this one high up because it was able to tell a good story with a good moral, and even makes good use out of the 3 strikes formula. I'm sure we've all been in a situation where we take on too much work to please others, and as it keeps piling up, something eventually has to give. This one shows the importance of knowing your limits and when to say no, a lesson people of all ages can struggle with. I also appreciate that this one focuses on Victor, one of the era's new characters. In this era, any engine who isn't Thomas is lucky to get one episode per season, so for a new character to get a lead at all is pretty special. Despite this, it's rather clear how little the writers know about the steam engines. Thomas has a loose footplate? Emily needs polishing at the steamworks? And why are Ari and Bert not at the diesel works? Despite the inaccuracies, I think this episode is rather underrated, and I recommend this one.
The worst possible thing!
Time for a story.
After Thomas finishes tooting at the children,
he tooted happily to the children.
The Fat Controller tells him to deliver books to the library for the children's story time. His first mistake is not waiting for the books to be covered. Then when he sees a red signal, he decides to go down the branch line instead of stopping. And when he doesn't slow down for a piece of track under repair, the trucks fly off and spill everywhere. So Thomas decides to bring the teacher and the children to the field for story time. There is so much wrong with this episode. First, they made a big deal of the books being not covered. But even if they had, nothing would have changed. Also, if you're meant to go down the main line, don't go down the branch line. They are lines that branch away from the main line and take you somewhere else. That's like taking a dirt road off of a highway and expecting to get to a big city. The physics are also thrown in the trash when we see the trucks crash. Thomas also throws the teacher's schedule for a loop by deciding to take her and her class to the field for storytime without consent. Hello? Aren't the stupid books meant to be delivered? And finally, Thomas ignores a red signal. You should know by now that red signals are meant to be obeyed. This is a huge violation of railway safety and procedure. And in the process, he nearly kills these workmen by not slowing down or warning them of his approach. This is by far one of the worst episodes I've ever seen of the entire show.
Don't bother Victor.
After a night of hard work, Peter Sam meets Thomas at the transfer yards. While Mr. Percival goes to a meeting with the Fat Controller, Peter Sam is put in charge of the other engines. And while Victor is meant to visit the engines for maintenance, he is not to be bothered with little things. After he leaves, Rhaenys pops up and tells Peter Sam to go get Victor and fix Sir Handel and Skarloey. Instead, he goes and tries to fix them himself. But when he goes and tries to fix Duncan, he runs out of coal and realizes that Victor does need to be bothered to help fix everyone. So he finally has Rhaenys go fetch him, and everyone's repaired. I've said before I'm not too fond of this episode, but on this rewatch, it's grown on me quite a lot. Firstly, it's the only episode of this era that takes place on the Skarloey Railway. Second, this is probably the one episode that uses the engine left in charge plot well. It makes sense for Peter Sam to be left in charge, as he is reliable and has carried the whole railway on his shoulders, or buffers, before. And instead of problems arising because of his arrogance or pride, it's his desire to follow the rules and do what he is told that leads to his downfall. He has to learn to use his position and make decisions himself to keep things running.
When you're in charge, you can make the decisions. And I can decide that we need to bother Victor.
I also really like how Rhaenys is used. Ever since season 4, Rhaenys hasn't really been integral to any stories where he's in character other than the Old Bridge. But we don't talk about that one. But here, we see him being a voice of reason and teaching Peter Sam a lesson by showing him he does need to bother Victor, with a hint of passive aggressiveness.
Fetch Victor! I've broken down!
I'm sorry, Peter Sam, but you said we can't bother Victor with the little things.
Some other things I like are the accurate rolling stock, a Duncan name drop, and how it feels tailor-made for Peter Sam, much like Bust My Buffers did for Gordon. Really, the only problem I see here is the 3 strikes formula. But other than that, it's a really nice episode. I recommend this one. And that's all of them. I hope I've done justice to these episodes, both bad and good. And hopefully you've been able to find something to like or agreed with me in my rantings. But I've talked enough. I want to hear from you. What do you think are the best and worst episodes of the era? Did I miss them or undermine anything? Please tell me about it in the comments. So until next time, have a good one and stay really useful.